Hey, Mila Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. Welcome to all of my new viewers, my new subscribers. I'm very excited that you've decided to join us here. In case you're not familiar, every Saturday I synopsize a book. Sometimes it takes more than one weekend. I try not to do too many on one Saturday. It gets to be a bit much. And I'm always open to topics, by the way. The books can cover all sorts of topics, and you'll find a playlist under the title of my channel on the, I don't have the terminology. On the computer, when you go to YouTube and you go to my channel, there's a little list of like community and playlist. In the playlist, you should find a good number of my books that I've done. And then when you've gone through all of those, then you can just scroll through and check it out every Saturday, faithfully. This week I have a doozy. Oh, by the way, thank you to all the returning viewers. I'm so grateful. I'm just astounded. People keep coming back and seem to really enjoy these books. I'm very grateful. So this book that we're going to look at today is a little bit of a departure from what we did last time. And we're getting once again into the paranormally archaeology type stuff. Today we're going to do the Sirius Mysteries by Robert Temple. New scientific evidence of alien contact 5,000 years ago. Now, this is an updated version. This book was written in the 70s, updated in 98. So it's not a new book. The wheels of archaeology move slowly, and there's always a lot of resistance to new theories. So I don't figure that much has changed. But this theory of Robert Temple's was paradigm shifting in a lot of ways. And I just think it's a fascinating study. It makes a connection between archaeology, ancient history, linguistics, art, mythology, and the DNA of tribal people all over the world throughout time. It is very interesting. So I will warn you that this book is dense. It was quite a slog. I got partway through it, and then I thought, I am never going to be able to synopsize this. Each paragraph is so full of this sort of rabbit hole of information. This is related to this, which is part of this myth, which is related to this, which on the map. So I have tried to compromise. I've told some of the stories in depth. I've done some of the linguistic connections in depth. And then I don't want to say glossed over, I've summarized really succinctly other chunks of the book. If you are interested in this topic, I highly recommend this book. I think it's one of the more important books on the subject. And the basic theory, I will give you the basic idea, which, he gets lost in the details here and doesn't return to this too often. And I want to be sure that you understand what the point of this is. If you can keep the point of it in the back of your mind, everything gels together. So let's see if I can get this right. Sirius is actually 3 planets, A, B, and, stars, not planets. So there we go. 3 stars, A, B, and C. Sirius A, Sirius B, Sirius C, in a constellation in the sky. And he takes, how do I explain this? He takes the shape of the constellation, which is somewhat like the prow of a ship, and superimposes it on the map of the ancient world, using instructions gleaned from coded messages in both archaeological measurements and mythological stories. Now I know this is already, it's complicated. We're in the first chapter and it's already complicated. It's really fun. It's a really intriguing kind of an intellectual rabbit hole. If you like archaeology, if you like ancient history, and if you find the notion of humanity being given civilization, being created and given civilization by intelligent beings from another planet who left their knowledge for us in a way that couldn't be lost in a pre-literate society. And then we immediately forgot all about it. So let's just dig into it. I'll try to clarify as we go along. I hope I don't confuse everybody. So now that everyone's running in the other direction, let's start The Sirius Mystery by Robert Temple. And this is the 1998 version. He says, ancient traditions of a tribe in Africa have highly precise astrological information about invisible stars in the Sirius constellation system. How? How'd they know that? And what he's talking about is the Dogon in Upper Niger. And they knew about stars that we couldn't see until the 20th century with highly sophisticated technology. So digest that. I think that's fascinating in and of itself. The Dogon told modern astronomers about a third star in the Sirius system that could not be confirmed. People heard them and said, well, we're astronomers and we don't know about that. So, you know, you're just a tribe. That was the attitude. That's not me speaking. That's their attitude. But now we know about Sirius C, and it was verified in, wait for it, 1995. These people knew about it some thousands of years ago. So Temple's hypotheses in a nutshell is this. In the past, Earth was visited by intelligent beings from the Sirius system, and the degree of their interaction, the length of time of their stay, the legacy of what they left behind is all up for debate. All of it is up for debate. Now, he is really thorough. That's one of the reasons why the book requires attention when you read it. He doesn't make any statements that he doesn't back up with research and data, and many of the things that he talks about are subject of hot debate. You know, conventional mainstream science and archaeology, astronomy and archaeology, they don't want to entertain this. But that's how we make progress is, you know, just remember Copernicus. So when this was first made public as a hypothesis, the only people who were interested in entertaining the notion were what he calls, in quotation marks, New Agers. Now, finally, in the late 90s, the knowledge that these tribal people had that was written off as myth is now accepted as truth. They know these stars do exist. What else have they talked about that is not just myth? That's the question. Robert Bauval's name should ring a bell. He took Temple's earlier work, and then he developed the Orion mystery of Egypt. This is the theory that hypothesizes that the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the Nile are in a intentional relationship to copy the star map of the constellation of Orion. My knowledge of astronomy is the sky is up, so you'll have to forgive me. Temple says he lost friends. He got a lot of scorn every time he mentioned intelligent beings from, you know, elsewhere. People thought it was too lowbrow to discuss, you know, spacemen. Hang on a second, I might sneeze. Excuse me. All the greenery outside. He got a lot of scorn from professionals around him, lost some jobs. lost opportunity for jobs. But he did get some positive media attention because anything that's a little controversial, you know. His publisher was the most surprised because he's a serious scientist, you know. He's not a fly-by-night. So he wrote the book, you know, he put it out. It became a bestseller in Germany in 6 months. He got early support for his research from the head of the Royal Astronomical Society, who gave Temple some cachet, you know, legitimacy through proximity, basically. But he also got a lot of good-natured teasing from all these, you know, highfalutin scientists. He decided that he would not accept an invitation to go talk publicly with Timothy Leary, if anybody remembers Timothy Leary. I worked with his niece-in-law. Exciting. He avoided being seen in public with him because Temple hates drugs and he wants it to be known right away. So you can tell this book was written, you know, originally written in the 70s. He's very clear about that. I'm not on some weird drug trip. I am not into that. I do not believe in that. He wanted that to be very clear. So the Sirius Mystery, it affected attitudes. It also creeped into the creative world, which is interesting. Oftentimes that happens. 2001, Space Odyssey. There was a symphonic poem written by a composer who claimed that he, the composer, was from Sirius and his music was from Sirius. It inspired Doris Lessing, the writer. She wrote 5 science fiction novels because of this theory. Temple feels it's important that a great writer and a student of Sufi, because she was, gave it serious consideration. This was somebody who was willing to entertain philosophical viewpoint, not in the mainstream of her culture, and she was willing to listen to him too. He thinks that's significant. So he got a lot of mail. Many had ideas for him to explore further, but he says he got plenty of nut mail. One guy claimed to have made strange discoveries at the Bermuda Triangle, but people were trying to kill him, and he was later found murdered. Temple gave those letters to the police and then bowed out. There was some bad that came from all of this. He had extreme hostility from intelligence agencies. I think that's very interesting, especially American intelligence agencies. He felt targeted by false information put into security files, he found out later. He was blackballed from the Foreign Press Association in London by a guy in Washington, D.C. Who was this guy? Who was he affiliated with? The association admitted that that they'd been told, you know, don't let that guy in. But they let him in anyway because he was so widely respected. But he did feel targeted by some organizations. He makes it very clear that he felt spied upon because of his interest in this theory about the stars. Begs the question, doesn't it? He found out the CIA was exerting pressure against him and even threatened people to be against him. One friend, a retired brigadier, was asked to read and then make a report on Temple's book for British security services. They kind of gave him an assignment. Another friend, high in the police, was asked by MI5. I think that's like their FBI. I think MI6 is like the CIA and MI5 is like the FBI, or it's the other way around, but it gives you an idea of who they are. They asked they asked this friend to do a security report on Temple. This went on, this kind of harassment went on for 15 years. He lost income opportunities. He lost advancement at work. He lost friends. And he never really knew why. Nobody was ever frank with him. But I mean, it's kind of obvious that the subject was a touchy subject. Why was it a touchy subject for these people? I mean, why would government spies care? Very interesting question. The Soviet Union at one point aggressively suppressed the study of ET and paranormal phenomena. He believes that they duped the CIA and manipulated the CIA because the USSR wanted a monopoly on paranormal research, and they really were doing it on their own. He even claims that some study participants were permanently damaged the way that their tests were done. He notes how some subjects, like, for example, Uri Geller, were wigged out. That's the best term that I can think of. He says they used an abundance of caution and security because they perceived there were threats specifically from the KGB. This is before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then he mentions that Uri Geller only reads paperbacks that he can fit on his exercise bike, and that he will be on an exercise bike while he's giving interviews. Eccentric. Temple met a fellow NASA guy, a guy who worked with Wernher von Braun, and he was introduced by a Navy officer in NASA in the Office of Spaceflight. He met this Navy guy through Arthur C. Clarke. The Navy guy introduced him to von Braun's associates. So Navy guy, well, Arthur C. Clarke, Navy guy, von Braun, you know. So this German wrote bad reviews of Temple's Sirius book. He called his hypotheses far-fetched with no proof. He painted Temple like he was kind of a nut. The German was forced to clarify that this was his personal opinion and not NASA's personal opinion. They actually put pressure on him because they felt that he was misrepresenting what they thought. Arthur C. Clarke, now this is the science fiction writer, he warned Temple that another highly placed NASA official was maligning Temple to people of importance. This is fascinating. I think you have to step back just a little bit. There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of detail in this book. And you step back and you go, wait a minute. This guy's a scientist and he's studying these interesting ideas. They're just ideas. And all these national security people from a whole bunch of different countries, so far, US, UK, USSR, are all freaking out and bad-mouthing him and trying to undermine him and try to make him look bad. The BBC included Temple in a documentary in 1977. The producer got many anonymous calls from someone claiming to be with NASA and telling him to not include Temple. NASA has never dissociated itself from him. These are lies. NASA has never done that and didn't put anybody up to it. Who were these people who were lying about being affiliated with NASA? So then he goes on to talk about the Sphinx, what it looks like, and the condition it's in. These are two important factors. Nobody really knows much about the Sphinx. So we all think we know, but we don't really. He does not believe it's a lion with a man's head. He says it's not a lion. It doesn't have a mane. It doesn't have the chest musculature that's present in a lion and that is represented in other artwork of lions, typical of lion statues. It doesn't have a tuft on its tail like a lion, and its haunches are not typical of a lion. He said it's not portrayed seated in the typical R shape, typical of Egyptian art. There's all these artistic features and presentation of it in general are not in keeping with what it's purported to be. But we accept what we've been told. What do we know? I mean, I thought it was a lion. I never gave it two thoughts. Why would I doubt what the experts say, right? He says, well, take a minute and think about it. So it doesn't have all those different features of a lion. What is it? He says, actually, what it looks like more than a lion is it looks like a dog. It looks specifically like a pharaoh hound, which is an ancient Egyptian dog. He says what it really is a representation of, in his opinion, and just not him, there are other people who agree with this, Anubis. Now, Anubis, you have often seen the body of a person standing with this, it's called a jackal-shaped head. A jackal is kind of a wild dog. He said it's not a jackal, it's a pharaoh hound, it's a dog. It's just a regular dog. But what they have figured out over time, a lot of what we take as Bible about ancient Egypt comes from quite a while ago. The textbooks are written, the teachers are taught, the teachers tell us, and nobody updates it. Updating the information, prevailing belief is, we thought it was a jackal. Sometimes it was called a jackal, but really it was a dog, and they were interchangeable. And he thinks that this is a pharaoh hound on the Sphinx. It represents Anubis, the dog-headed god. It makes more sense that it's Anubis guarding the sacred area of the pyramids. So was this head recarved from Anubis? Is that what was going on here? It's disproportionately small for the body of it. Something happened to it. He believes that the area is of symbolic celestial importance in the same way that Bouval, I always say it wrong, Bouval thinks. There was a big debate for a while, and may still be ongoing, about the erosion around the Sphinx. The actual stonework itself is eroded. And he says it's sort of a red herring. It's water erosion. It was first proposed by John Anthony West in 1979. So they're trying to date the Sphinx. They're trying to figure out who made it, how old it is, how long it's been there, what it represents. And they said, well, look at this erosion. So he dates civilization in Egypt from 25,000 to 30,000 years old. But he says it didn't develop. One day it was there. And the next day, one day it was not there. The next day it was there. He said it was like a legacy. It was like handed to them rather than slowly developed over time. He even postulates that Egypt goes back to 4240 BC. And so this is a time period called the first Sothic cycle, Sothic. Now this name, Sothic, is very important. We'll get farther into it. It has to do with the period in which Sirius, the star, rises before the sun. And we're going to discuss that later, but he just wants to put that out there. So his words, now I'm not purporting anything. I'm just expressing, YouTube, what his theory is in the book. And I don't know. I'm not trying to change history or anything, but he proposes that Egypt must date to 3500 BC or before. And West argued that it began with the survivors of an Atlantis-type civilization. Temple says, well, I don't think it was an Atlantis-type civilization. I think it was intergalactic. But Temple doesn't dismiss that both could be true, that Atlantis might have been part of the development, but don't dismiss the possibility of there being intergalactic influence at the beginning of Egypt. Temple believes that certain people can't entertain the notion of ET intervention. It just shakes their paradigm. Their reluctance is, it's more psychological, he said, than it is intellectual. If you're being impartial intellectually, you have to be willing to entertain whatever data is put in front of you that is inarguable. And he said they don't even want to do that. We're not talking now about specific data, just in general. If somebody hands you information that's indisputable fact, even if it shakes you up, you can't just toss it out. This is his viewpoint. He doesn't support the theory of advanced science being purely human from a lost ancient civilization. He doesn't really support that. Now, a lot of people do. A lot of people believe cycles of floods, cycles of almost existential, terrible, chaotic events, and a very sophisticated culture is lost. We start again from the bottom up and slowly develop. And he doesn't really believe that. He believes in contact, intergalactic contact. He thinks much is buried in the Nile Delta that could tell us about pre-dynastic Egypt, about which we know nothing. He says it really hasn't been done. The archaeology hasn't been done. He sees a time gap between the proposed Atlantis influence and the high civilization of pre-dynastic Egypt, several thousand years of nothingness between Egypt and Sumer. What went on? You know, he says, wait a minute, there's a gap here in our story. He says West's theory leaves a gap of 22,000 to 27,000 years. There's just no information about what might have happened during that time period. Also, Temple doesn't believe the Sphinx is only 12,500 years old. He says that it existed long before the lifetime of Cheops and Khephren. Really old guys. So in summary, this is a lot. This book has a lot, but just stick with me because it really gets very interesting. In summary, he says he believes in ET interaction that helped to establish the civilizations of both Egypt and Sumer. I'm going to talk a lot about their similarities and their connection. And he said this is about the years 5,000 to 3,000 BC. He calls it the contact period. He believes the Sphinx and the pyramids were built by ETs during this time. Now, we're going to talk in depth why he believes that. The steppe period of Saqqara is a copy by Imhotep when the ETs were long gone. People want to say that it was the original and then eventually that the Egyptians got better at it, and he disagrees. He thinks it's the other way around. The Egyptians continued to copy it unsuccessfully, and Pyramid Age ended because they didn't really understand the engineering and mathematics that went into it. He mentions artifacts that suggest that ancient advanced scientific knowledge existed and was lost. For example, the Piri-Reis map of Antarctica. This guy made a map of Antarctica that showed the land under the ice caps. How did he know that there was land like that with that specific boundary under the ice caps? We didn't know until sophisticated ground penetrating radar went through the ice and showed us that his maps were correct. ETs mapped the Earth from space. They had, like, I'm going to use the word satellite. Obviously, that's probably not what it was, but they had things in the sky, technology that could see the land masses beneath the ice. This ancient knowledge was intended to be preserved and used when we were more developed. Whoops. We're supposed to figure this out, and when we do, it will indicate that we understand that ETs did exist, and they want us to detect them. They want us to figure this out for ourselves so that we don't freak out. It's the ethics of galactic species interaction. So what he's saying is they can only go so far. They helped us a very long time ago and then left us to it, but they left lots of hints, hoping that we would remember, but there were memory objects to help us remember. The Sphinx, the pyramids, all this stuff. And yet somehow we managed to mess that one up. So they're hoping that what was left behind by them will come to our understanding. We will begin to understand it. They're not allowed to just show up. And I promise you, if they decide to come, they're already here. But were they to make themselves known, it would not be on the White House lawn. Okay, so in his book on Egypt, West discusses the water erosion on the Sphinx. This is very interesting. Temple disagrees with the belief that the Sphinx was there when the climate was different and the ancient rains more than 10,000 years ago caused the water erosion. That's how it's explained. He doesn't dismiss the idea that there might have been a high civilization like an Atlantis, as hinted at by finds that were made in pre-Mayan Olmec and Tiahuanaca in Bolivia, or the Sun Gate and the Nazca lines in Peru. He says there are bits of evidence that there was some sort of civilization. I'm not speaking for him. I'm not, as Robert Temple, I'm not denying that that could exist. There could have been an Atlantis, but there's more going on. He says he sees strong evidence in favor of contact, a period between 5,000 and 3,000 BC. So I will be repeating what he often repeats because he introduces the information in little doses, adds more, and then refers back. So the Egyptians and the Dogons both spoke of civilization coming from the Sirius star system, which we didn't know was a system till the mid-1990s. The Babylonians said civilization was brought from heaven. The Dogon and the Babylonians agreed that these beings that brought civilization were amphibious. Their astrophysics is accurate. These civilizations, these ancient civilizations, the astrophysics they did have was very accurate. And but thus far, no one has been able to disprove any of their actual science that they had in those days. Keep in mind, this is very much in keeping with what Paul Wallace says. Paul Wallace approaches it from a linguistic and spiritual text point of view and comes to the same conclusions. It's really interesting. So Temple disagrees with the conventional age dating of the Sphinx, which says it's about 4,500 years old. He disagrees with West, who says it's 12,500 years old. This book is full of dates and time periods and epochs, and it'll make your head spin. So I have tried to narrow it down and just get the most salient parts of the argument. And if you feel like, well, wait a minute, I disagree with that because what about this? You'll have to read the book because I could not include everything in the synopsis. Conventional dating just ignores the water erosion. We can't explain it, so we'll pretend it's not there. He says you can acknowledge the water erosion without believing that it happened in a rainy period more than 10,000 years ago. You don't have to believe that. The Sphinx sits in a deep pit now, and it's filled with sand. And for a long time, they didn't know it was there at all. Only a little bit of its head was poking out. Eventually, I think it was Napoleon, if I'm not incorrect, they finally figured out, oh, there's a body connected to it, and they now know there's a gigantic pit all around the Sphinx. The Sphinx, he said, was often in the past buried up to its head by shifting sands. And then he postulates, what if that pit originally was filled with water? He says there are archaeological texts indicating the Nile flooding conduits that were built that brought water from the Nile to the plain of the pyramids and the Sphinx, that there were deep wells there. One of my favorite old writers, his book reads like it's just like a movie, is Herodotus, who was considered, loosely a historian from the 5th century BC. He was what you might call a travel writer, and he did more traveling than most people ever did in those days. He went all over the place, and he was really engaged with the new things that he saw. And he wrote these histories of Herodotus are absolutely wonderful, fascinating work. So in the 5th century BC, when he was in Egypt, he talks about the pyramids. He talks about Egypt. He talks about watching a man be killed by a mob because he accidentally killed a cat, and cats were sacred. Anyway, he doesn't talk about the Sphinx because the Sphinx was possibly completely buried. See, he writes of channels from the Nile water that surround the pyramids. The Great Pyramid was entered. You could go into it. Well, you couldn't go into it. I couldn't go into it. But important people would go into the Great Pyramid chamber via a canal from the Nile. I never knew that. Smaller pyramid. This is what Herodotus says. There's another historian later who says the same thing. He may just be echoing Herodotus. There are some other mentions of it that kind of back Herodotus up. And now it gives you a whole different perspective on the water erosion in the site. The smaller pyramid was encircled, kind of like it was on an island, but circled by a canal with water in conduits brought in from the Nile. Herodotus describes a tour of a labyrinth beyond Lake Moeris, I'm saying it wrong, and near the city of the crocodiles, so that there was much more contact with the water and more use of the Nile water interacting with these sites than there is now. He said there were several levels, chambers, like 1,500 plus chambers underground, including burial vaults of the kings and water courses that contain sacred crocodiles. Lake Moeris was huge and man-made, and it had 2 pyramids in the center. Water was brought in from the Nile by a channel, and water in a lake, Lake Moeris, flowed in and out to the Nile in 6-month cycles because of the rise and fall of the Nile. When the Nile overflowed, towns became islands, and all of Egypt became a sheet of water, and people traveled by boat over the plains. This is what it was like in those days. So this lake and labyrinth situation sounds like it would appeal to amphibians. Isn't this an interesting thought? So now, just to reiterate, the Sumerians and the Egyptians both believed that civilization was brought by an amphibious race of extraterrestrials. This is ancient. And the situation underneath the pyramids and the Sphinx, there's all this stuff going on down there. And they're discovering new chambers, recesses, spaces all the time. There was just one a couple of months ago. They don't know what's going on down there. So he's saying that Herodotus claimed that he went into this labyrinth underneath these structures. And now it says the lake and the labyrinth situation sounds like it would appeal to amphibians, but it's not known today where all this exactly was. Herodotus's narrative contradicts the idea that Cheops was to be buried in the Great Pyramid. I don't know where I read this, but I have never believed that the pyramid was a tomb. It may have been, and I'm just saying this, I'm not claiming this as fact, I'm speculating. It may have been used as a tomb long after it was first created. It was not created to be a tomb. And it seems like that's backed up by a lot of ancient stuff. So he's talking, he says, about this remarkable feat of hydraulic engineering. Cheops was supposed to be buried in an underground chamber on a hill. That was the plan. And it indicates on the Giza Plateau, an important site was surrounded by water. But I don't know where any of these things were. I mean, now they don't know how to find them. Let me read you what it says here. The second passage from Herodotus, he speaks of water from the Nile, which comes in through a built passage and encircles an island, in which they say Cheops himself lies. Is this not absolutely clear? Temple says, the Sphinx bears the face of the pharaoh. And if encircled by water in the retaining pit, the pharaoh lies there, just as the Egyptians said, in an island surrounded by water. It could be Cheops, it could be his brother Kepharon. It matters little. The two could be there together. The point is, there was an island where they were buried, and it has been forgotten. And there was a whole connection between the Nile and the plateau situation going on with water and channels and labyrinths and a lot of underground architecture. So at that time, the body of the Sphinx was covered by water, and only the pharaoh's head was seen, what people now call a lion, which he maintains is a dog, Anubis, but essentially, originally, it was the pharaoh's head. So the pharaoh is on an island, and if it's not where the Sphinx is, where else is it? Where is it? So Temple theorizes the pit around the Sphinx was a moat. And today is, there's a little water, but there's still water under the Sphinx. Not everybody knows that. There's still water under that Sphinx. And archaeologists don't know what to make of it. And he says there's evidence that seasonal floodwaters would reach the Gaza Plateau and the Sphinx and cause water erosion. And he says especially water erosion when you have wind and sand. It acts like sandpaper. And the erosion pattern lends itself to this theory. It looks very much like seasonal presence of water. The head is less eroded because it wasn't underwater, but also because it didn't get rained on. Remember, the theory is that it was there during a time of a lot of rain in Egypt. Well, how come it's not eroded from the top down? Because it's absolutely not. Because it wasn't there when there was a lot of rain on it. Temple doesn't believe the Sphinx dates back to 2,500 plus years ago. I'm sorry, 12,500 plus years ago. And it doesn't date back to some high Atlantean civilization. He thinks an ET visit was more recent and it helped to kickstart civilization in Egypt. He believes that ETs from Sirius came and did it, and he is going to tell us why. The Dogon agree. Sumerians believe this. The Babylonians believed it too. And later on, we find out that the Hebrews believed it. Somebody, and the Greeks, and well, we'll get there. So these tales are of aquatic beings, like amphibians, from a watery place, some watery place, and he suggests that the Sphinx sat in water because the beings were amphibians. Geologists found chambers under the Sphinx filled with water, and there may be records under there. He says the underwater situation would have been a security measure and perhaps done by design to preserve these records, make them less accessible. He mentions, but he doesn't want to dwell on it, the measurements and the math in the pyramid. So he mentions it, but I don't want to dwell on it either. At some point in the book, he goes through this whole description of the relative ratio of pieces of the two pyramids and what that means in the context of the stars in the Sirius system. And it's an absolute exact equal ratio on the ground as in the sky. He said, well, we'll get to it. It's really interesting. Temple was the first to suggest a stellar pattern intentionally replicated on the ground, as in Bauval's Orion Mystery, who, he got it from Temple. Bauval noticed how the southern shaft of what they call the Queen's Chamber, is the space inside the Great Pyramid, it points to Sirius, or where Sirius would have been in ancient times. Temple points out that the two Great Pyramids are in relationship to each other in the same way that they represent the relationship between the stars, Sirius B and the sun. They're comparative measurements. And they also contain references to mathematical concepts involving Pythagorean principles that are concealed in numerical codes that are very sophisticated and only recognized by expert musical theorists. This is where it gets really interesting. I find this really intriguing to speculate. I will admit I can barely understand it sometimes, but it's fascinating. Okay, this is on page 22 to 25, and if you want to get the book and follow this concept, that's where you would find it. It is very sophisticated, complicated, and I can't water it down. It's just too, it's a Gordian knot of knowledge. It's called the comma of Pythagoras, is what we're talking about. It was used as advanced concepts in nuclear physics. And when it was used in nuclear physics, it's called the particle of Pythagoras. It expresses the minute discrepancy between the real, ideal, and it could be that the builders were signaling to us that the pyramids are a symbolic representation of a real cosmic fact. So let me try to say that again. The mathematics is so advanced in the structure and relative measurements of the pyramids, both their structure and their relationship to each other, that taking their measurements, scientists went, oh, well, I recognize these numbers. This is what's called musicologists would say, oh, this is the comma of Pythagoras. Physicists are saying, this is the principle, the particle of Pythagoras. And everybody went, whoa, how did they know that? How did they know that? And why would they put that into these primitive buildings? Well, they were trying to preserve in the most lasting material that existed on the planet a signal that they possessed this knowledge, that these concepts were theirs, to let us know, look what we could do. Look what we know, and to let us know about the stars, which we didn't understand. We didn't identify all of the stars in the system until 1995. This was thousands of years ago. It's remarkable. The comma of Pythagoras is implicit in the structure of the universe, and it's absolute throughout the cosmos. How did they know that? The correlation between the two pyramids also in ratio is the exact value of the sacred fraction 256 over 243. What is that, you ask? I don't know. So this is astrophysics. This is advanced music theory. This is stuff that I just don't really understand. He explains it in excruciating detail. I'm just going to tell you the conclusion, because the explanation is really, really sophisticated. So how is this all known? It's astrophysics, and they recognized it. It was known to the ancients. We needed to relearn it. and accepted it later that this was a real thing. This really is something that they're using. This is not just coincidence. You would never just land on these numbers by coincidence. This math is involved in the concept of the heliocentric theory. I mean, come on, which is talking about the sun, being the center of our solar system. The hieroglyph of Sirius is the triangular face of a pyramid. Now we're gonna get into some interesting stuff here. You could call it coincidence. I don't know. So when they did in Egypt, they drew Sirius as a hieroglyph. They drew a pyramid. In Alexandria, some people believe the pyramid was used to observe Sirius, so it was like an observatory. The music, the harmony of the spheres, is related to the sacred fraction that I mentioned, 256 over 243. And it describes the relationship between Sirius and the sun. It indicates the possibility of absolute numerical expressions recurring in the cosmos. This is esoteric knowledge. This is serious stuff. So ancient pyramid builders knew about this. Temple thinks it indicates that the universe has more structure than we thought, that it's so exact that it can actually be expressed by repeating ratios. Hang on, I want to see how much more I have to go in this chapter. Okay, just goes on and on. He thinks it indicates that the universe has more structure than we thought. And in other words, two stars, 8.7 light years apart, have a mass ratio that is not random. It expresses a universal harmonic value. So think about that a minute. Those two stars, in relationship to each other, repeat a ratio that occurs throughout the cosmos in many different places and ways. Temple proposes this is because the astrophysics and evolutionary development of the stars follow certain harmonic laws. So this theory seems to have been known by the ancients. I don't know how they came up with this because I'm reading about it and I still don't know. I still don't get it. But we'll just explore the idea, let it sit. He believes star formation may be a binary process, so stars just don't pop up by themselves. There's a relationship between two stars. Star types may be expressions of harmonic ratios and frequencies. So he reminds us that even chaos is in order. He explains that according to the complexity theory, this is a theory, instantaneous communication exists in portions or cells, parts of huge macro regions of space. They're sometimes called cells, but they're huge regions of space, as though they aren't separated by spatial distance. I think somebody like Einstein might have talked about that. When complexity begins in the system, it results in instantaneous long-range order times 10 million. He says it's a spontaneous creation of complexity. He calls this the Anubis cell, the space that includes our sun, Sirius B, and beyond. It's a self-organizing open system of long-range order. We are in harmonic resonance with the star system Sirius, specifically with Sirius the star. What effects would one expect from that? You would expect that they affect each other. And because it's such great distances, he says you have to entertain the notion that they affected thought and information across that distance in a way we don't know yet. Long-range, instantaneous communication between them and us may be possible, and therefore we may receive communication from the Sirius star system. And there's something about this ratio, this harmonic ratio, that overcomes the limitations of the speed of light. Psychic communication, non-material interaction of souls, may therefore be entirely possible. The Egyptians believed that Sirius is where we go when we die. So did Dogon. Is Sirius the other world? Does Sirius send us inspiration through harmonic resonance? This idea is replicated through nature. Sponges use harmonic resonance to communicate within their own body system. Is our Anubis cell, our distance, to Sirius, is that a macroscopic neuron? As above, so below. Is it alive? Is the vast ordering principle actually an entity? I love the challenge of these questions. Over time, has it spontaneously generated a consciousness? Do we communicate with the entity by modulating the Anubis field, also known as prayer? So if you insist you are I can't read the word. I think it's alone. If you insist that you're alone, you're fooling yourself. He says, only listen to tentative suggestions. They could be possibly true. You don't know. We don't know. These are speculations. But the math and the science, the physics and the math seem to be there and support it. And then I wrote, P.S. This book is hypothetical. It's a thought experiment based on a lot of facts, a lot of research. So let me read this to you. I want to stress that everything in this book is hypothetical. I've never insisted on the truth of any of it. If it were all disproved tomorrow, I'd be surprised, but not dismayed. I believe we should never, never accept anyone's insistence upon the necessary truth of a theory which cannot be proven. To do so is to surrender your integrity as an entity yourself. That is why one should never join a religious sect or cult with a leader who says they know the absolute truth. There have been several very sinister cults which have adopted the Sirius Mystery as a recommended text, but never, with my encouragement, Temple's encouragement. I do not, cannot, and will not ever support such cults. Most of them have sensed that and have left me alone personally. All cults are destructive of human integrity. I feel sorry for people insecure enough to join them. The cult leaders exploit their insecurity by offering them spurious leadership, and I condemn utterly anyone who attempts to make use of my writings or ideas in connection with such activities. Also, he says, okay, here's a little bit of fact. The values of the slope angles of pyramids echo the ratio of the radii of Sirius and the sun. The relative masses are reflected in the ratio of the heights. At first, he said he'd speculated that cosmic travel would maybe require cryogenics or a one-way trip only. But these guys ascended and left, but maybe they didn't go all the way back. He says that's something else to think about. Are they somewhere floating above us in supposed suspended animation? The Dogon believed that a new star, and he questions, is it an orbiting base, appeared while the ETs were here. It's called the star of the 10th moon. or Nomus. And Temple says, is this actually a star base? This is CTs. He wonders, are they parked up there like a moon, like the number 10 moon of the system, of another planet up there? He says Saturn would have that many, and it is anomalous, and it's called Phoebe, the 10th moon of Saturn. It's in retrograde orbit. It has a smooth surface. There are lots of unusual things about this star of Saturn. Moon of Saturn to think about. Temple asked, could it be artificial? So let's break here. And this chapter goes on for a while. We'll talk about Phoebe, this anomalous moon of Saturn, and what it might mean for earthly civilization. So I hope this is interesting. I'm struggling mightily to make something very technical and really complicated simple so I can understand it. And I hope I'm not confusing everybody. Let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do to fix it. But this book is really dense and really interesting. We're going to get into some weird stuff. You're going to love it. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you're enjoying this. I'll be back with a little bit more of it for this weekend. And in the meantime, Slongafoil, Slancha.